Welcome everyone to this talk about enabling change, leading occupational safety and health into the new world of work. As was said before, please ask questions. It would be great if it was interactive. It really helps me to know what you're thinking about. The chat is there on the screen, so put them in there and then I'll come to them at the end of the session. So my name's Alison Hind. I've worked in operational risk management, so I'm talking about health, safety, environment, quality for about 30 years. And in the last 5, I've noticed a huge amount of change. This has been a very common message in other RiskIn presentations that I've been to. I noticed that Adrian Clements is here on the call. He particularly talked about changes coming and it's getting faster. So we're no longer able to look back and track trends to help us predict the future. Now we have to have a vision of that future, understand the challenges that it brings, and be able to turn those into opportunities. So that's really what my talk is about today. I'm CEO of an organization called Proactively. It's a mobile first company, and we're making use of technology to help us work more efficiently, to engage people, and to use real-time information to make data-driven decisions. I'm from the UK, you can probably tell from my accent, but I'm now living in Switzerland and loving it here despite the mist outside and the COVID restrictions. I do think it's probably much worse in the UK, so pleased to be here. In the UK, I was part of an organisation known as IOSH, which is the Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. And I very much enjoyed, we had monthly get-together meetings where we could share ideas, and it was a very open forum for doing that, very full of trust. When I came to Switzerland, I was looking for something similar and couldn't find it, but I did manage to find some like-minded people, and we started the IOSH Swiss network about 3 years ago. So I'm chair of that group. What we were doing before COVID, we had a series of face-to-face meetings. The last one was at the ILO in Geneva on health. The one before that, we covered fire, hosted by the SBB, and they demonstrated their fire trains, which was quite exciting. We all got soaking wet, although it was a rainy day, if I remember rightly. The one before that, we looked at leadership, and that was hosted by Nestlé Nespresso, and we got to look around their site and ask questions of their plant manager. So really some good events. Then, of course, COVID came along and we stopped all the face-to-face. Now, a lot of what we're doing is around a WhatsApp group. So again, it's that networking feel to it, and our members are particularly talking about COVID and their response and benchmarking what they're doing against what other organizations are doing. So I'm here as chair of IOSH Swiss Network, and if anyone would like to find out more about that and join us, then please get in touch. So there's a third logo on your screen at the moment, Lloyds Register. Lloyds is a charitable foundation. They work on testing and insurance, so it's high risk work, lots of work at height, work over water. They take a very proactive approach to health and safety. I'm very grateful to their director, James Pomeroy, who's allowed me to share this presentation with you today, and it has lots of examples about how Lloyds Register is approaching the future. Oh, now this is where I try and, okay, right, there we go. So the world of occupational safety and health is being disrupted. I'm just going to move things around a bit here. A word, VUCA, you may have heard of. It's a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. It's a word that was brought about by the US military in about 1990 when they were fighting and they didn't really know who the enemy were. So it was volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And this word could very easily be used to describe how we're living today. Everything is changing. We've got changing in the theories we use, the work we do, the technologies we apply, and the outcomes we seek. So on the right hand of the screen, there's a word cloud. It's got lots of words that you'll be familiar with today, but if you think back 5 years, you'd probably never heard of them. So just take a few moments now to have a look at the word cloud and see what's in there. So the presentation today is about making sense of all those words, bringing order to them. It's looking at 6 megatrends which are reshaping and challenging occupational safety and health. These 6 megatrends, where have they come from? So lots of research done in this area, and this presentation is particularly based on work by the Health and Safety Executive in the UK, who've published a foresight review. The Australian regulator has published in this area, and of course EU OSHA too. So I've got 6 megatrends here that I'm going to share briefly with you, and then we're going to look at 3 of them in detail. We'll start with looking at demographics. We know that we're working longer into retirement, and that is certainly bringing risk with it. At the other end of the spectrum, we have Generation Z. So these are the people who are aged 8 to 23, starting in the workplace, but bringing very different ideas, different ways of work with them. These are the people who can't remember a time when they didn't have a smartphone in their pocket. And we're also seeing a more reflective community, so a lot of awareness of environmental issues, for example. The next megatrend that we're going to look at is mental health and stress. I mean, this is growing hugely as we move in a society from industrialization to a service economy. So it's as if you are always at work, it's always there. And of course, we've had COVID bringing with it isolation, increased domestic violence, worries about yourselves and particularly relatives, older friends, and the pressure on the economy. So pressure of losing work, how will that impact on you? So an enormous amount of stress being generated here. In fact, it was thought before that 1 in 4 will suffer some form of mental health problem, and now that's believed to be 3 out of 5, and I can imagine with COVID even higher numbers than that. For us as occupational health and safety specialists, mental health can be a new area, so it brings real challenge with us to get up to speed in it. In the UK particularly, we've seen an introduction of mental health first aiders, which is working really well, giving people, trained people, but your peers that you can talk to about things. The next trend up here is new theories and new approaches. So you can see in the background here, the Heinrich accident triangle. This has been the foundation of safety and health. But provocatively, it's got rest in peace written over the top of it. This is because the data in this triangle, we're now with an access to bigger data, seeing that it doesn't add up. And the things that injure people are not the same as those that cause the fatalities. So we're having to look for new theories and new approaches that we can work with. The next one down here is data, digital and technology. So picture of robotics coming in, increased screen time coming in, all these things bringing risk into our working environment, but also offering huge opportunities for how we can develop and control those risks and work safely. So AI and learning, neurolinguistics, drones, we'll have a talk about these later. But as we move into a 4th digital age, lots of opportunities. So the 5th megatrend we have here is about the nature of work. The idea of a job for life is gone, long gone. And if we look back, the origins of health and safety, again, around the 1970s, trade unions are very strong. We're in a workplace where there are few contractors. Now it's completely different. In the UK alone, we've got 5 million workers working in something called a gig economy. So this is where you've got very flexible work pattern, which might be something that you want to work like that, and it might be something that you've been forced into. So we're seeing this move from soft services, for example, pizza delivery, and now it's becoming more mainstream work. So many organizations, it's thought, are using this way of working to get cheap labor and sidestep their legal obligations, because it's very unclear what is the legal right of these people? Are they employees? Are they external contractors? Do they have the same legal protection, sick pay, holiday pay, employment rights like minimum wage? And we have already seen tribunals in 2016. It was ruled that Uber drivers were workers, and so they too were entitled to a minimum wage. The last one on here is fitness and chronic ill health. So we're looking now at non-communicable diseases, particularly diabetes and obesity. Obesity is predicted to be rising to by about 30% over the next 10 to 20 years. And we can probably all feel that we are less fit living in a developed world. I mean, I particularly for myself can say that since I've been anchored indoors with COVID more, my ability to go running and all these things has gone down. So I am definitely less fit. But what does this mean for us in the long term? Well, particularly if you're in a sector like construction or transport, you maybe in the future will find it difficult to get the fit people that you need for part of how you are working. So let's start on our first. I'm going to go through 3 of these mega trends in detail. And the first one is demographic change. So we have at the left-hand side of your screen, Generation Z. These are, as I mentioned before, the 8 to 23-year-olds. There's less of them. The birth rate has been falling. That's a result. And when working with them, you need to be taking a different approach. Their expectations of work are also quite different. We'll look at that later. At the other end, we have older people. We've got an increasing 3.7 million more workers above the age of 50. This is a UK statistic. These are vulnerable people in our workplace. So as occupational health and safety people to take account of. Going again to the UK, US statistics, fatality rates are 25% of the fatalities are for people who are over 60 years, some over 65. And only 10% of traditional employment is for people in this age group. But this 10% figure is rising. So we're getting more vulnerable people in our workplaces. Usually we're thinking about pregnant workers, young workers when we talk about vulnerable workers, but we can see now that this is not the case, or it's not limited to this. Then in the middle, we have 2 pictures which are expressing gender and diversity. So rise in the number of women in employment and diversity, a more inclusive workforce. Traditionally, workforce was male. And increasing in diversity brings some big benefits. Excuse me. I hope everyone brought their cup of tea to the meeting. In the first, if we look at the design of cars, in the first 40 years, they were worked on by men and based on male anthropology. And at this stage, females accounted for 47% of the more likely to die in a car accident. So now if we're bringing in a more diverse environment, that will really help in designing systems for the future. Let's have a look at the demographic challenge, particularly at Generation Z. So these are the children of the millennials. These are the people, as I said, can't remember not having a smartphone. They've been educated differently. Now, if you're like me, I had a very traditional education, so someone standing in front of me in a classroom and talking, and I asked questions and I looked at my school books. Quite different to what's happening now and what I see my children going through. It's now digital first, and children are being taught to critically challenge information. What I can see from my children is they have a much lower attention span. So think about what your training looks like. If you're using huge PowerPoints, then that's not going to be the most appropriate in the future. It needs to take that information down to bite size, and we need to make it more visual. Again, if you're communicating with people under the age of 25, you'll know you get a lot of text, but those texts tend to come as images rather than text. They're very, very visual. Storytelling is an area that is really powerful for getting the message across. And in the future, we need to look more at how we can use that in health and safety. So we have now talked a lot about leadership, but actually we're far more influenced by what our peers are doing. So thinking about lessons learned and how we can share that. Again, currently, you have an accident or a near miss or something, and you will go and investigate, you collect statistics, and you analyze those, and then you share them in some form of lessons learned. Think about how much more powerful it would be if you got that person who was involved in the incident to make a selfie of what happened, why they did this, what did they feel like? And then that can be really powerful to share across the organization. So that's something that we can look for the future. It's for sure that Generation Z have much better IT skills probably than we have. And so they have the capability for engaging with this and making these selfies. Right, I'm going to now have a look at some of the examples of this happening. Mobile engagement, which is an area I'm particularly working in. So mobile phones come with some fantastic built-in features, languages, taking photos, they automatically stamp date, time, location, and they share real-time information. So we can make use of these. We've talked a bit about reporting incidents, but imagine things like task assessments. So traditionally, a risk assessment, it's probably a large amount of paper or an Excel spreadsheet. It might even have been produced by a consultant. So they produce a detailed assessment and then it gets stored somewhere. And it's not really seen as a live working document. If we can change that to using smartphones where the person who is doing the job, so they're the real expert, does a task assessment, he goes through and says, have I got the right PPE? Am I qualified to do this job? What are the hazards that I'm going to experience? And he thinks about that actively before starting work. Then it's a much more useful experience. And it makes it live, so it keeps up with what how you're working. The next picture here, virtual reality training. I do hope you've had a go at this because I found it quite fun. But it's not just about the fun. It's obviously a great way of training people remotely. So you can talk through someone who's in a different country how to do an operation. And training in hazardous environments, hazardous activities. So huge potential. The next one, visual literacy. So here's an example from Lloyds Register. They are trying to get away from those health and safety procedures, which are often very text rich, and simplify and change it to pictures. So this is much quicker and better for an international audience to digest. And they're using this for their procedures, but also for learning from incidents with pictures, with animation. And then the last one here is about storytelling. So getting people to make a selfie. And I have an example here from Lloyds Register. I'm just going to, I found that the best way is to unplug the microphone. So let me do that and then press play.
For only the realization of this video, I will operate the circuit breaker myself. But normally during the inspection, the circuit breaker is to be operated by the electrician. So when we were in front of the my switchboard, I found the circuit breaker isolated like this. As you can see, circuit breaker is open. It's locked with a padlock, but the padlock itself is not closed. This is wrong. It's a wrong way to isolate the electrical equipment because somebody can just remove the padlock and the circuit breaker is ready to operate. So before carrying any electrical inspection, we need to verify that the equipment which is going to be surveyed needs to be electrically isolated, the circuit breaker correct lock, and the key for the padlock is to be in hands of the electrician or the person who has signed the permit to work. or only the
Okay, hopefully you can hear me again. So that, I think you'll agree, is much better way of sharing information on permit to work, on lockout, tag out, than just putting a sign up and putting a procedure in place. Now we move on to the second of our mega trends. So we're going to look at new theories and new approaches. Again, in the background, we have that Heinrich triangle. So Heinrich is from about 1930s. He worked in an insurance company and had access to lots of accident data. So he analyzes this and he comes up with some of the theories which are the foundations of our health and safety strategies today. For example, human error accounts for 80% of accidents. He sees accidents as linear, so he's introduced a domino series where you have your accident, you have your underlying causes, and then you have your root causes. And if you remove any of those dominoes, then you're going to prevent the accident from happening. And probably the most famous that you can see here is his accident triangle. So at the bottom of the triangle, we have the near misses. And then as we move up, we have our minor injuries, our serious injuries, and at the top, there's the fatalities. And what Heinrich says is that there is a definite ratio between all those different layers of the pyramid. But now we have much more big data, and we can do further analysis on this, and it's finding that these numbers are not adding up. As we said, the things that injure people are not the things that kill them. So we're trying to think about how we can approach that. And these are the strategies that are getting put in place. So zero harm versus safety differently. I think that a lot of organizations I go to today are talking about zero harm. And we have to think, is zero harm achievable as a question? So an alternative approach is safety differently. If we look traditionally, occupational safety and health is a compliance system. It's control, it's based on compliance and control, and oops, I've gone the wrong way. Top-down type presentation of how we work. So we're seeing, just like Heinrich said, workers cause 80% of accidents. So workers are really, they're the safety problems. They make mistakes. And we're going to try and influence their behavior. How we do that, we put strict procedures in place. Now, this is increasing bureaucracy and it's showing a lack of trust. And how do we measure performance? Well, we measure it by a lack of accidents. So it's quite a negative system. And it's quite easy to have underreporting. So particularly if we're focusing on zero harm, how many of those events actually got reported? We can see examples of companies that have had a great safety record. I'm thinking of Deepwater Horizon, that before it had the incident in 2010 that killed 11 people, was a great company for occupational health and safety. So looking at different systems, safety differently, brought about by Sidney Dekker. So this is based on competency and common sense. It's more of a bottom-up approach. So we're seeing now people are the solution, that they are the people who do the job, are the really experts in it, and we can learn from them to create success. If there's a problem, then we need to, rather than look at behavior, we need to change the conditions. So we need to make sure that people have the right tools and the right environments for their work. And we're looking to measure positives, so leading indicators that can predict the future. Looking down to the next on this list, root causes versus HOP. So HOP is human organization performance. Let's think about root cause. So this is how we work today. A root cause, if you go to a near miss, an accident, you then gather information, you track back, you identify the underlying causes and the root causes of that. The idea, of course, being that if you address the root causes and solve that, then you're stopping that and many other similar incidents happening. But how you define that root cause depends very largely on your view. In a past role, I was an ISO auditor. So I went to hundreds of organizations and looked at their near-miss reporting, their non-conformance reporting. Now, it's a requirement from ISO that you identify the root cause. So on all their bits of paper, there is a white box with root cause written on it. Now, I ask you to think about what is written in that box. And I'm sure that that you cynically will have come up with either it's left blank or someone has been blamed for the problem. So root cause, in my experience, is something that we do a lot of training in, but it generally is done badly. And the best root causes I've seen are by organizations who collect really good data and then get an overview and look at the trends and seeing what's happening across their organization and use that to identify root causes. So the alternative on this line, HOP. HOP is about thinking that people will make mistakes, they break rules, and we know this happens. We know that there is a known frequency and we know the influencing factors in it. So actually what we need to do is design our systems to fail safe. We need to design resilient systems. It takes the lead from the automotive sector. So historically, cars could be very dangerous. There was no seat belts, no airbags. If you had a head-on collision, you ended up with a steering wheel through your chest. Now, the design of cars expects you to have an accident, and it's designed to keep you safe. So the car industry has changed how it thinks, and we need to translate this into other areas of work. And the way for doing that is a learning team, so involving the people that do the job and the people who design the job. Last on this list, we have SIF thinking. So this is significant injury and fatality. And if I can move to the next slide. So two graphs that you have in front of you. We've got US fatalities on the left, UK fatal and serious injuries on the right. Now, if these graphs were for looking at minor injuries, you'd see that the trend is very much downwards. Those are reducing, but they're looking at serious and fatalities. And we can see on both of them that we're sitting now in an area of a plateau. So the traditional theories are not working for serious injuries, and we need to change how we're thinking about it. So how can we think? The first thing is, where are we going to focus? So severity versus frequency. Again, we've got this triangle in front of us, but with better data, particularly gathered by the Campbell Institute and DECRA, we find out that of that bottom line, only 20% of things on there are predicting the accidents at the top. So to prevent serious injuries, we need to be focusing on those 20% rather than the 80% around the outside. Health and well-being. So this is an area that's becoming increasingly important as we realize that actually lost time due to health is greater than due to safety. The cost to an organization is greater than for safety. And so there has been a change in emphasis towards health and well-being. But it's a new area for a lot of us, and we need to make sure that we have the skills to deal with that. We also need to make sure that we're not ignoring those safety incidents because they're still there, they're still important. So what are we monitoring? Precursors and high potential issues. So a precursor is something that shows a clear correlation between this happens and it could lead to that fatal accident. So for example, if you're driving, then if you become distracted or you're tired or you've got excess speed, then that is very likely to cause a serious accident. So these are a bit like the Holy Grail. They make great leading indicators. If we can identify those precursors and then measure them, then we have a real opportunity for preventing those serious injuries and fatalities. And down below it, what do we monitor for employee well-being? Well, this is you know, historically, we're measuring lost time incidents. And that is not a great way of measuring employee well-being. So we're going to have to bring new measures on board. Technology can really help with this. So where we learn where things go right. Okay, so historically, if we look at what Decker has to say with his safety differently, he says that things go wrong 0.01% of the time. Things go right 99.9% of the time. So why are we focusing on when things go wrong? And this is what we're at the moment doing. We have spent a lot of time investigating incidents. Below, another safety differently thing, work as imagined, work as done. So work as imagined is when you write procedures. This is what we expect people to do. Work as done is what they actually do. And there's a variance there. Now, today, if you're seeing that, you probably then go and talk to that worker and say, you need to follow the procedure. Perhaps in the future, we're able to learn from that variance and improve our procedures. So it's about recognizing that the real safety expert is the one that's doing the job. I need to go a lot quicker here. So examples of what Lloyds Register are doing. They have, on the left here, we've got precursors for modeling. So this is where they're doing incident investigation. And instead of just characterizing what you're finding, they're allowing people to freely express in words or in writing what happens. And then they use neurolinguistics to analyze that and find out where those trends are. And you can see this on the left, we've got words coming up: third party, tired and fatigued, speed, and vehicle faults. So these are those precursors that we want to focus on. Whoops. In the middle, training for high risks. So really thinking about what are you training for? At Lloyds Register, one of the things that they came up with was high risk work they do. They do a work over water. So to transfer to a new boat, you bring a small boat in, you put it alongside a big boat, you use a wooden ladder to climb up onto the boat. Obviously very high risk, and currently no training in that area. So they're looking for how they can train in these high risk areas. And then on the right, we have simplifying processes. So today, probably what happens is you get an audit finding, have an accident, and you write another procedure. You make your procedure a bit longer. What Lloyds Register have done is they've taken their procedures down. So it's gone from 620 pages down to 48 pages. And they're really in that focusing on what is important, and of course using pictures as well. So one term I came up with, just someone sent to me, TLDR. If you just think, is this something you've seen? So it means too long, didn't read. So if you're sending 10 to 15 pages of a procedure to someone and they send you that back, then it means there's two things. They didn't read it, two problems. They don't get the information and you're not communicating well. And that's a real time to look at what you're doing. So I'm going to whiz through new technologies, which is the third area of our work. So looking at Internet of Things, where we can use remote sensing, artificial intelligence and data analytics to get those trends and the learning for data-driven decision-making, smart PPE, and drones and robots so that we don't have to go into dangerous environments. Thinking how we work at the moment, we have very much a paper safety system in action. So this is what we're trying to use to keep people safe, to get them going home safely at the end of the day. We call them fancy names, risk assessment or permit to work, but really they're bits of paper. And we're now looking at changes in technology to find better ways of doing this. So how are we doing that? First of all, we have connected worker. So on here we can see, for example, at the right-hand side, we're getting people to wearables, whether it be watches or smart fabrics, smart PPE. You can see here that something has been built into the hard hat. Looking on the right-hand side, how we control things today can be very primitive. In construction, being struck by a moving object is the second or third biggest cause of fatalities. So we need to warn people. If we give people these wearables, we can warn them that they're moving into a hazardous area. The other devices there, process controls. We can warn people if they're entering an area where there's a confined space, where there's a toxic gas. I have been talking recently to an organization called Epimetrics, and they're looking at monitoring the temperature of workers so we can measure their well-being. And particularly, you know, if you're going into a confined space, it's good to know if there's likely to be a problem with that. They're a Swiss company, and I'm sure they'd love to hear from people as well. Next on here, we've got drones. So the big benefit of carrying out inspections without having to go into those hazardous environments. And then down the bottom, we have analyzing and improving through artificial intelligence and data analytics. Huge potential for data pools and sharing that information. So looking at what Lloyds Register do in this area. Well, on the left, we've got the safety scanner. They're using this to mine data from hazard reports. We saw before how they investigated road accidents with this, and it's proving very successful in finding those precursors. Lloyds Register run a safety accelerator scheme, which is great for you to get involved with. I'm sure if you're interested. I certainly went along to it. Here we can see that it's an oil rig, so a high hazard environment. If people drop tools, then it can cause corrosion, which is obviously a huge problem for the industry. So this startup is using the existing CCTV image and then analyzing the big data to find out where the problems areas are, so we're not having to send someone in to investigate. And then on the right, we've got piloting safety tech. So here we've got pictures of drones, and I'm sure you're perhaps already familiar with sending drones in to do inspections. The big question here is we're gathering lots of data. So what can you do with it? We need to use it to learn to be smarter and more effective. Okay, so that was a run through the 6 megatrends and looking at 3 in more detail. I just want to have a look at what that means for us as occupational health and safety practitioners. So the changes for us in our profession. First of all, curiosity. There are some new ideas coming forward, and we need to question if our current performance is adequate. Evidential. So for a long time, our theories have not been based on good evidence. We need to make sure that new ways of working are based on proven evidence. Risk-taking. More and more as we go forward, we're going to have to take risks, but we're going to have to be comfortable in doing that. So we're going to have to understand the situation well and know what is to take and what is not. Again, that Brexit presentation, talking about the future for the UK coming through Brexit, they're going to have to be more productive, which will mean taking more risks. So great opportunity for doing that well, and unfortunately possibilities for doing it not so well as well. Vulnerability, the last one. So traditionally, how we talk about health and safety, we memorize facts and figures and legal requirements. But the new world of work is not about knowing data. It's about asking the right questions. It might be difficult for us to let go of what we've been doing in the past, and it will make us vulnerable. Okay, so that's my last slide. We've had a look at what's happening now, and we've had a look at what might be happening in the future. Obviously, different organizations are going to be sitting at different points on that spectrum. So it's up to you to decide what is appropriate for you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and have a look at the chat and see if we have some questions. Let me bring it across here. Okay, questions. So the first one is, how do you encourage older workers to use new technologies? Now that is a good question. I can speak from personal experience. I'm obviously promoting a mobile app, which is very easy to use if you're used to the technology, and not so if you're older generation. An example of where we're using it is a ski club who are using it for their risk reporting, and a large number of these workers, of these members of this club, are of an older generation. And I've spent a lot of time explaining to people how QR codes work, but generally it's been accepted as a really quite a good way to communicate, and that they're quite excited by it. I've seen companies do a very good job of pairing people together. So you have a younger, more inexperienced worker with an older worker. The older worker promotes the culture of the organization and how the job is done. And then the younger worker can share its knowledge of technology. And that's a really good combination to get sharing of information in two directions. Second question here. Paperwork is largely driven by a need to demonstrate compliance. How do we do this otherwise? So I would say compliance. We can already see from the new ISO standards that previously ISO asked for procedures, and now they're asking for electronic information and taking that as evidence. So it doesn't mean that you have to have a bureaucratic system in place. And when we talk to regulators, the perception of the regulator is, what they want is results. They understand that bureaucracy doesn't get people on board. It doesn't get the right results. So what they want to see is that you have a system in place that is enabling good working practices, and that you're interested and in control of that. My talking to regulator, I work a lot with people from the health and safety executive, and they're not looking in the main for large amounts of paperwork. A last question here. I hope that answered the question. You can tell that I'm sort of wound up. I'm plowing my way through these things. Okay, Adrian has asked about, we experimented with hard hats with head-up display and drawings. SOPs were all used to ensure the worker had all the real information in real time and up to date, and it worked well. That's great. Adrian, are you here?
Yes.
Would you like to talk to us a bit about that? Share your experience.
So in order to, you mentioned before, procedures have to be updated, and they're normally done like once a year, once every 2 years or something, but technology is changing instantaneously. So we actually embedded in the hard hats of our workers head-up display, where when a maintenance person went out to do a job, he could actually see the three-dimensional isometric drawings. He had them in his line of sight because it was head up. He had exactly the new updated real-time procedures in his hand, which meant that we could avoid a lot of errors. We could avoid a lot of shortcuts. It also meant, which is maybe positive or negative, that we didn't need as skilled workers, because we could use slightly less skilled workers to do the routine jobs, because they had all the information in front of their eyes at the same time. But we actually reduced tremendously the frequency rates and smaller lost time injuries by using this head-up display.
That's really interesting. A real thank you for sharing that with us, experience of how technology can bring huge improvements to occupational safety and health. Great. I've come to the end of my questions on here. Does anyone have another question? If you want to type it in.
Maybe if I can just ask, as I was on speaking, one of the biggest issues that a lot of companies have today, and it'll get worse probably because of COVID, is this idea of there's no income, but they still have expenditures. And of course, safety, environment, health is maybe compliant, but very, very important. So one of the questions that some of my clients have been asking is, how do I prioritize my restricted CapEx and OpEx? Yeah, do I do it pure safety driven? Do I do it environmentally driven? Do I do it health driven? Do I make the asset, the actual physical machine, safer, which will have an impact maybe on all three? So where do I spend my money? Do you have any idea from your clients on how they are prioritizing their spend to make sure that it's effective?
So I think COVID, as you said, has changed how we look. One of the interesting areas is how it has moved health and safety up in organizations' priority. It now really is a boardroom decision. I'm certainly seeing that there was a rush of spend money to put in place what we need to, short-term fixes. And now we're looking to how we can change to a more robust system, because it's become the normal working. So my thought is that's how people are prioritizing. It's how, with regard to COVID, how they can make this a sustainable way of work. So how they can have people working at home, but still communicating successfully. So I think that. Okay, I have one more question that I'm going to share with you. How successful is e-learning at getting the message across? So e-learning brings some big benefits with it. You can do it at any time. It's on demand. If we look at what successful learning has, we have a presentation, we test whether people understood it, and then we have to have follow-up and refreshers and things over time. And e-learning offers us the opportunity to do that. I would say to get the best results, what you need to have is some blended learning. So a mixture of e-learning and face-to-face and on the job and all sorts of things. Okay, that's the end of the questions. I have 1 minute to say goodbye to you all. Thank you very much for joining me today. And I hope that you are able to take some of this forward to your organizations and help how you work. So thank you very much for joining, everyone.